She had negotiated billion-dollar deals without her pulse changing, had stood before flashing cameras and hostile boards without a tremor, had buried grief so deep that even she believed it was gone. But the moment she stepped into the airport terminal and saw them, the world stopped. The glass walls, the echo of rolling suitcases, the distant announcements all faded into a dull blur as her breath caught in her chest. 6 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. Her ex-husband stood there, taller than she remembered, worn in a way time only carves into people who have carried children and secrets alone. And between him and the wide corridor holding his hands were 2 little girls in matching coats, their faces so achingly familiar that her knees nearly gave out. Twin daughters she had not seen since they were babies. In that instant, the billionaire woman froze, not because she was powerful, but because she was suddenly very human again. Before the story pulls you deeper into this moment, pause for just a second. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the idea that even broken families can find healing, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive and reaching hearts around the world. 6 years earlier, she had walked away with a single suitcase and a heart full of determination that masked fear. Back then, she was not a billionaire. She was a woman drowning in expectations and the weight of a marriage that had grown quiet and heavy, and in the terrifying realization that she was disappearing inside a life that no longer fit. The twins had been barely 2, their laughter still soft and unsure, their hands still always reaching for someone else. She told herself they would be better without her confusion, without her restlessness. She told herself she would come back when she was stronger, when she had built something solid enough to deserve them. That lie became the foundation of her rise. The years that followed were brutal and brilliant in equal measure. She slept in offices, missed holidays, and learned to armor her emotions with strategy and ambition. Each success pushed her further from the woman she had been and from the mother she should have been. Photos of the twins, sent occasionally and carefully by her ex-husband, were both comfort and punishment. She memorized their faces as they changed, the gap in one smile, the seriousness in the other's eyes. She sent money, gifts, opportunities, but never herself. The world applauded her ascent, calling her an inspiration, a self-made force. No one saw the empty hotel rooms or the nights she pressed her palm to her chest, wondering if the ache would ever stop. Now, standing in the airport, that ache roared back to life. The twins were no longer toddlers. They were little people, walking confidently, coats buttoned neatly, hair brushed with care. One clutched a teddy bear, its fur worn thin from love. The other scanned the terminal with bright curiosity. They looked safe. They looked happy. And that realization cut deeper than if they had looked lost. It meant he had done well without her. Her ex-husband had changed too. The sharp edges of resentment she remembered were softened by patience. There was a steadiness in the way he guided the girls, in the way he moved through the busy terminal like someone used to being responsible for more than himself. He had built a life around them, not despite her absence, but because of it. She had expected anger if she ever saw him again. What she had not expected was the quiet dignity of a man who had survived abandonment and turned it into devotion. She tried to move, to step back into anonymity, but her body refused. This was not a boardroom where retreat was strategic. This was a reckoning. The twins' eyes lifted almost at the same time, drawn perhaps by something familiar they could not name. Children sense truth before they understand it. Their gazes met hers, and for a suspended second, recognition hovered in the air like a fragile glass ornament. Oh, she felt exposed, stripped of titles and wealth. Just a woman with a history she could not rewrite. The airport became a corridor of memory. She remembered the night she left, the way the twins had slept through it, unaware that their world was about to split. She remembered the look on his face when she told him she needed to go, the way he had listened without shouting, without begging, because even then he understood that love could not survive being forced. He had let her go, not because it didn't hurt, but because holding her would have broken them all. As the distance between them closed, time seemed to slow. She noticed the small details, the scuff on his shoes, the faint lines around his eyes, the identical tilt of the girls' heads. Her heart hammered with questions she had never allowed herself to ask. Did they hate her? Did they even know who she was? Had he told them stories, or had her name been folded away like an old photograph kept out of reach? Her success had been built on control, but here she had none. She could not script this moment or soften its edges. All she could do was stand and let the truth catch up with her. The truth that leaving had not erased her love. The truth that love alone had not been enough to stay. The truth that 6 years was both a lifetime and an instant. He noticed her then, really noticed her, not as a passing face, but as the woman who had once been his partner in the quiet hours of the night. His expression shifted, surprise flickering briefly before settling into something more complex. Not rage, not triumph, just gravity. Oh! The weight of shared history pressed between them, heavy but undeniable. The twins sensed the change and looked up at him, then back at her. Their hands tightened around his, a reflex born of trust. That simple gesture broke something inside her. She had imagined herself irreplaceable once. She had been wrong. They had found security without her, and that was both a relief and a sorrow. People flowed around them, unaware that a family's fault lines were visible in this ordinary place. She thought of all the speeches she had given about resilience, about choosing yourself. None of them mentioned the cost. None of them spoke about the nights when success felt hollow, when applause echoed too loudly in empty rooms. Standing here, she understood that achievement and loss were not opposites. They were companions. The twins' faces softened with curiosity rather than fear. They were old enough now to sense importance without understanding context. In their eyes, she saw no accusation, only questions. That was perhaps the greatest mercy she would ever be given. Children had not yet learned the art of resentment. They only knew absence and presence. Her ex-husband shifted slightly, positioning himself in a way that was protective but not closed. It was a subtle thing, but it spoke volumes. He was not guarding them from her. He was simply ready to catch them if the moment tipped too hard in any direction. He had learned balance in the years she had been gone. She felt tears burn, unfamiliar and unwelcome. She had trained herself not to cry in public spaces, not to show weakness. But this was not weakness. This was the body remembering what mattered. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself not in power but in humility. Whatever happened next, she would face it without the shield of wealth or reputation. Memories layered over the present, birthday candles blown out without her. First days of school she had only seen in photos. Fever soothed by someone else's hands. She had told herself that building an empire was a way of providing. Now she saw the flaw in that logic. Provision without presence was only half a gift. The airport announcement crackled overhead, calling boarding groups, reminding everyone that time moved forward regardless of personal revelations. She realized that this moment, however monumental, would not last forever. The question was not how it would end, but what it would begin. Her ex-husband's eyes met hers again, and in them she saw exhaustion, yes, but also something unexpected. Acceptance. Not forgiveness yet, perhaps not even understanding, but an openness to reality as it was, not as it should have been. He had lived 6 years without waiting for her return, and that had given him a strength she had not anticipated. She thought about the woman she had been when she left, convinced that choosing herself meant abandoning everything else. She was older now, wiser in a way success alone could not teach. She understood that identities were not mutually exclusive. She could be powerful and present, ambitious and accountable. The tragedy was that this understanding had come so late. The twins shifted, their attention drawn fully to her now. One smiled, tentative but sincere, a small curve of the lips that mirrored her own smile in old photographs. The other studied her more seriously, as if trying to solve a puzzle. That difference, so small and yet so defining, told her they were already becoming distinct people, not just reflections of each other. Her heart expanded painfully with love that had nowhere to go, love without entitlement, love without expectation, love that simply existed, regardless of whether it was returned. She realized then that whatever role she might have in their future, it would have to be earned slowly, patiently, without grand gestures or assumptions. She had come to the airport for a business trip, another meeting, another deal. None of it mattered anymore. Plans rearranged themselves in her mind, priorities reshuffling with a clarity that startled her. This encounter was not coincidence. It was consequence. As they stood there, the noise of the terminal resumed its volume, the world insisting on its continuity. She felt oddly calm. The panic had passed, replaced by resolve. She could not undo the past 6 years, but she could choose what the next 6 would look like. Not as a savior sweeping in with money and apologies, but as a woman willing to show up, to listen, to be patient. She noticed the teddy bear again, its stitched smile crooked but resilient. It reminded her of something she had once read about love being the willingness to be worn down by time and still remain. Perhaps that was what her ex-husband had become. Worn, but still standing, still loving. This was not a dramatic reunion with tears and embraces. It was quieter, more fragile, and therefore more real. Healing rarely announced itself loudly. It arrived in moments like this, in airports and silences, in the choice not to turn away. If this story is something inside her or face the consequences of the choice made long ago, stay with it. Let it remind you that it is never too late to confront the truth with courage. The twins' presence grounded her. They were not symbols of her regret or her redemption. They were simply children deserving of honesty and care. She understood now that any future connection would need to center their needs, not her guilt. That realization was both sobering and freeing. Her ex-husband's posture relaxed slightly, as if sensing the shift in her. Years ago, he had loved her potential. Now he was evaluating her reality. That was fair. Trust, once broken, did not mend with words alone. It required consistency, humility, and time. She felt a strange gratitude for the years apart. They had forced each of them to grow in ways proximity never would have allowed. He had learned to be enough on his own. She had learned that being enough on her own was not the same as being whole. The airport lights reflected off the polished floor, creating the illusion of a path stretching forward. She followed it with her eyes, imagining a future not defined by absence but by effort. There would be awkward moments, setbacks, perhaps rejection, but there would also be the possibility of connection, of slowly weaving herself back into a story she had once left unfinished. Just before the moment slipped into whatever came next, she held on to one truth with clarity. Love did not expire. It waited, changed shape, endured, changed shape. And sometimes, if you were brave enough to face it, it offered a second chance. Before this story closes, take a moment to reflect on what it stirred in you. If it touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you miss or a bridge you wish you could rebuild, please like the video, share it, and subscribe. Your engagement tells us these stories matter. And one last special request before the ending fades. Comment below with a single word that describes what this story made you feel. Hope, regret, love, healing, or something else entirely. Your words may help someone else feel less alone. She stood there, no longer frozen, no longer running, simply present in the aftermath of her choices and the possibility of grace. In the middle of an ordinary airport, surrounded by strangers rushing past, a fractured family found itself at the edge of something new. Not certainty, not forgiveness, but something just as powerful, the willingness to begin again. The moment that followed did not explode into drama the way movies promised. There were no rushed embraces, no tears falling onto coats in the middle of the terminal. Instead, there was a silence so dense it felt physical, as if all 4 of them were standing inside a glass sphere cut off from the rest of the world. People passed by, wheels rattled, announcements echoed, but for her, everything narrowed to the steady rise and fall of her ex-husband's chest and the small weight of the twins' presence between them. She realized then how much she had feared this exact stillness. Noise would have been easier. Anger, accusations, even rejection would have given her something solid to react to. Silence demanded honesty. Silence asked her to stand there without the armor of success or excuses. For the first time in 6 years, she did not reach for a role to play. She simply remained where she was. Her ex-husband was the one who broke the standoff, not with words, but with motion. He guided the twins a step forward, not toward her, but into a clearer space beside him, as if acknowledging her presence while refusing to force meaning onto it. That restraint told her everything she needed to know about the man he had become. He would not weaponize the children, not for anger, not for closure. Their well-being came before his unresolved pain and before her need for absolution. As they moved, she caught the twins' expressions more clearly. One was openly curious, eyes bright and searching. the kind of child who leaned toward the world instead of away from it. The other carried a quiet caution, her gaze steady, measuring, as though she instinctively understood that not all things that returned were safe to rush toward. Then, the difference struck her deeply. Even without her, they had grown into themselves. That knowledge humbled her more than any loss of status ever could. She followed them at a respectful distance as they walked toward the seating area near the gate. The decision was not spoken aloud, but it felt mutual. There were things that could not be processed standing in a crowded corridor and things that should not be discussed at all, at least not yet. Sitting down felt like an agreement to acknowledge reality without tearing it open. As they settled, she noticed how naturally he moved through small acts of care. He adjusted one girl's sleeve, brushed stray hair from the other's face, checked their boarding passes with an efficiency born of repetition. These were the invisible labors she had missed, the countless moments that never made it into photographs or updates. Watching him now, she understood that while she had been building a legacy the world could see, he had been building one that lived quietly in daily routines. The twins perched on the seat's legs, swinging slightly, their attention flicking between her and the wide windows beyond the gate. She could feel their awareness of her like a soft pressure against her skin. They were trying to place her, to fit her into a story they only partially knew. That uncertainty mirrored her own. She was also trying to understand who she was allowed to be in this moment. Her thoughts drifted back to the years in between, to the version of herself who had convinced herself that distance was temporary. She remembered telling herself she would come back once she had achieved enough, once she had something impressive to offer. The cruel irony was that the more she gained, the harder it became to imagine returning without disrupting the fragile equilibrium they had built. Success had not just carried her forward, it had walled her off. Now, sitting across from the life she had left behind, she saw how flawed that reasoning had been. Children did not measure worth in accomplishments. They measured it in presence, in reliability, in who showed up when they were scared or sick or simply needed to be seen. No amount of money could replace that. Her ex-husband finally looked at her again, really looked, as if assessing not her appearance but the space she occupied now. Time had altered her too. The sharpness that once defined her had softened, replaced by a steadier gravity. She no longer radiated urgency. Instead, there was a quiet resolve in the way she held herself, as if she had learned that some things could not be forced, only tended. In his eyes, she sensed a complicated blend of emotions. There was history there, undeniable and heavy. There was pain that had not vanished simply because years had passed. But there was also a recognition that the woman in front of him was not the same one who had left. That did not erase what had happened, but it shifted its meaning. The twins leaned closer to him, drawn perhaps by the emotional undercurrent they could not articulate. One rested her head briefly against his arm. The other tightened her grip on the teddy bear. That small gesture grounded the moment, reminding everyone involved of what truly mattered. This was not about revisiting old arguments or assigning blame. It was about two children whose lives had been shaped by a choice they had not made. She felt an urge to explain herself, to narrate her absence in a way that might soften its impact. But she stopped. Explanations too often centered the person giving them, not the people who had been affected. What the twins needed was not a story about ambition or self-discovery. They needed consistency, honesty, and time to form their own understanding. So she did something that surprised even herself. She let the silence stretch again, this time without fear. She allowed the moment to exist without trying to control it. In that stillness, something subtle shifted. The tension eased, just slightly, like a clenched muscle beginning to relax. Her ex-husband spoke then quietly enough that the twins could hear but would not feel pressured by. His words were simple, almost understated, acknowledging the unexpectedness of the encounter and the reality of their shared past. There was no accusation in his tone, no attempt to reopen wounds for the sake of release. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have already done their grieving and are no longer looking for someone to blame. Listening to him, she felt the full weight of what he had carried alone. The early mornings, the hard decisions, the nights spent worrying about doing enough, being enough. She had once believed leaving would spare them all. Now she saw that it had simply shifted the burden entirely onto his shoulders. The twins listened intently, absorbing not just the words but the emotional cues beneath them. Children were remarkably adept at reading between the lines. They could sense sincerity even when they did not grasp complexity. And in that moment, what they sensed was not conflict, but care. She realized then that this was not about reclaiming a role she had abandoned. It was about earning a new one, carefully and without entitlement. She could not step back into motherhood as if nothing had happened. But she could offer herself honestly, without promises she might not keep, without assumptions about forgiveness. Her ex-husband did not invite her into their lives outright. He did not shut the door either. Instead, he acknowledged the possibility of conversation, of gradual contact, framed entirely around what would be healthiest for the girls. That boundary, firm yet fair, felt like a gift. It gave structure to hope, preventing it from becoming reckless. As boarding time approached, reality asserted itself again. Flights would depart, lives would continue. This encounter, as profound as it was, existed within the constraints of schedules and responsibilities. She felt a pang of fear at the thought of them leaving again, of this moment slipping into memory without transformation. But she understood now that forcing closeness would only recreate old patterns. When the announcement came for their group to board, the twins gathered their things. One looked at her again, this time with a small, shy smile that felt like a tentative bridge. The other offered a more reserved nod, acknowledging her presence without fully trusting it. Both responses felt honest. Both felt earned. She stood as well, maintaining the respectful distance she had kept throughout. She did not reach out, did not try to touch what was not yet hers to touch. Instead, she held their gazes steadily, letting them see her as she was now, not as an idea or an absence. As they prepared to move toward the gate, her ex-husband paused. There was a brief exchange, not dramatic, not final, but significant. An understanding that this would not be the last time their paths crossed and that whatever came next would require patience from all of them. He did not offer forgiveness, he offered openness. That, she knew, was far more valuable. When they walked away, the twins glanced back once more. The moment was small, but it lodged itself deep in her chest. It was a reminder that while she could not rewrite the beginning of their story, she might still have a chance to influence its middle. She remained standing long after they disappeared down the jet bridge, the noise of the terminal rushing back around her. For the first time in years, the future felt uncertain in a way that was not terrifying, but alive. She did not know exactly what role she would play in her daughters' lives, or how long it would take to earn trust. But she knew one thing with clarity. She was done running. In the days that followed, she canceled meetings she would once have considered untouchable. She reorganized her schedule, not impulsively, but deliberately, carving out space for something that did not yet exist, but might one day. She reached out carefully, respecting boundaries, accepting that progress would be measured in months and years, not dramatic gestures. So the world did not applaud these changes. There were no headlines about a billionaire choosing restraint over expansion, humility over control. But for the first time, she did not need that validation. Something quieter and more enduring had begun. Her ex-husband watched these shifts from a distance, cautious but observant. He did not shield the twins from the truth of her existence, nor did he rush them toward connection. He answered their questions honestly, without bitterness, allowing them to form their own impressions over time. In doing so, he modeled a strength she deeply respected. Gradually, carefully, contact resumed. Short conversations, neutral spaces, moments that were allowed to be awkward without being forced into significance. She learned to listen more than she spoke, to accept discomfort without retreating. Each small step felt monumental because it was grounded in reality, not fantasy. The twins adapted in their own ways. One warmed quickly, curiosity blossoming into cautious affection. The other remained observant, trusting slowly, testing consistency before offering vulnerability. She welcomed both responses, understanding that love was not owed to her. It had to be built. There were moments when guilt surged unexpectedly, when the weight of missed years felt unbearable. In the past, she might have drowned that feeling in work. Now she let herself sit with it, learning that regret could coexist with hope. That facing pain was not the same as being consumed by it. Over time, something remarkable happened. The story of their family shifted from one defined by absence to one shaped by effort. Not perfect, not seamless, but honest. She learned that redemption was not a single moment of forgiveness, but a series of choices made consistently over time. Years later, she would think back to that airport as the true turning point of her life. Not the day she made her first million or closed her biggest deal, but the day she stood still instead of running. The day she allowed herself to be seen not as a billionaire, but as a flawed mother willing to do the work. The airport had not given her closure. It had given her something far more challenging and far more meaningful. A beginning that required humility, patience, and love without guarantees. And in that choice, she finally found the kind of success no amount of wealth could ever replace.